You know where you are!
This is Appetite for Distortion.
Welcome to the podcast, Appetite for Distortion, episode number 432. My name is Brando, and I guess welcome to the sexual harassment lawsuits episode. I never thought I would be doing an episode of a Guns N' Roses themed podcast talking about sexual harassment, but I said since episode one, I'm not into just talking about my favorite song for 60 minutes for years. Whatever touches the Guns N' Roses world, I'm going to talk about it. That's the kind of person I am. That's the kind of podcast this is. So my guest today, Guns N' Roses fan, and also lawyer. That's what I needed because I wanted to have an intelligent and rational discussion, which cannot happen on Twitter or X or social media. So I said last episode, I was getting death threats, being told to kill myself, being called a rape apologist because I support Axl Rose right now in the lawsuit against him. So let's get a Guns N' Roses fan Guns N' Roses / the actual abbreviation, the punctuation, lawyer, Jeff Hackney, who is a partner at HKM Employment Attorneys out of St. Louis, the hometown of Richard Fortus. So welcome, Jeff. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today to talk about some difficult things.
Thanks, Brando. Appreciate it. Glad to be here. And, we're going to take a sort of clinical approach to some kind of wrenching, difficult, emotional things. And I hope that, the distance and just rendering a professional eye doesn't make any of this seem insensitive. And I'm sure there's people in the audience who have been through things. And
you're
so
right.
I'll just keep that in mind.
That's the approach, and that's what I wanted. It would be one thing, if I wanted to talk by myself, and I have my one viewpoint, and I'm not narrow-minded enough like a lot of people are that my viewpoint is the only viewpoint. Am I biased because I love Guns N' Roses? Would it hurt too much if Axl really did these things? And we've heard these rumors for years, not just this specific case being cited that happened in 1989, but the famous People magazine with the battered beauties talking about Erin Everly and Stephanie Seymour both settled out of court. All the controversy around Axl with 1 in a Million, but he still has millions of fans, female fans. I've interviewed hundreds of people on this podcast. Only one of them really has anything negative to say about Axl, and that's Alan Niven. And he has his viewpoint too, because he was fired, around that time. So I take everyone's opinion with a grain of salt, including mine, but I wanted to get a clinical approach to this, an intelligent one, and try to have this kind of matter of fact, how do we feel as fans, and explaining what perhaps we don't understand about it. Because a lot of people just see the clickbait title and like, oh, okay, Fernando and Guns N' Roses are screwing Katrina Benzova, their photographer, several years out of copyright and sexual harassment. They can see that, but I want to get behind that case as well. And with Axl, again, I defending him, and I'm being called like a rapist by proxy, and that's just sick. It's sick even if you believe that by Axl, but just to call me that is just a sick thing to have happen. So those were a fun few days on Twitter, and you responded on Twitter, which I really appreciate because I put it out there. I'm like, hey, if a lawyer, Guns N' Roses fan wants to come on, let's do this. So let's do this. So the first one we're going to talk about, it happened. I think it came out maybe right after the tour ended, essentially, maybe a few weeks ago when this podcast is coming out. I don't think a month yet. That Kat, very famous for her black and white photos, was the sole like Guns N' Roses photographer for years throughout, not in this lifetime. and she was kind of noticeably missing this time around with the tour, because with Guns N' Roses, the way it's presently constituted, it's like a family. You know about Slash's girlfriend and her photos, and Duff's wife, and Katrina's on there, was on there also, like promoting a lot of charities that the GNR got involved in, Save the Wolves, Save the Elephants, a lot of animal rights things that Slash and Axl are into as well. And then it's like, okay, she wasn't there anymore, didn't have any idea why. Then this lawsuit, this giant lawsuit came out. And how many pages did you say that was? You
Yeah,
told me.
it's a 274 page complaint.
Whoa. So needless to say, I kind of just went on what people highlighted and what was written in articles. I wasn't going to read all of that, but I'm not judge, jury. I don't need to read all that. The first part of it is copyright, which, Jeff, it's so ironic because I don't know how long you've been following my Twitter and following this podcast, but there was a time, pun intended, there was a time a couple years ago that fan sites, especially on YouTube, were taken down citing copyright use. Some I understand, if they were leaks that were coming out, they were, actual songs that were on albums, but a lot of that were just them were fan filmed video. Like I had my original Twitter taken down because of my own fan filmed video of Absurd when he was announcing he was coming out at midnight, and I had trolls striking me. And then now they're being sued for copyright. Some sort of, and I know you're not a copyright lawyer, so I don't know how much we can
I'm
get.
not.
Yeah, you're not. So maybe it's just a Guns N' Roses fan, your thoughts on this part, and we'll talk about the sexual harassment stuff, which is your specialty. But she was a contractor and didn't have like a new contract each year, even though she asked Fernando for them, and he would say, "We're family." You don't do contracts with family. And she's just seeking damages of just a lot of her photos that she was not given credit on. And within that, and this you could speak to, is that she cited sexual harassment from Fernando. Him coming on to her, sending her lewd photos of, like, one involved an ape, like a gorilla grabbing his dick, just like weird stuff. And Fernando's a married man. And one time he cornered her allegedly cornered her in an alley, saying no one's going to believe you. Just weird things. Just like you hope it's not true. I tend to believe it just based upon the specifics given. Kat has a career that she's putting in jeopardy. Like, she's filmed Daryl Smith. She's a rock and roll photographer. So she's taking a huge risk here. So I don't know if you can't give any legal thoughts on the copyright, but what are your thoughts on that? And I guess just the case itself involving the sexual harassment.
Yeah, bringing one of these claims, it's not something that's undertaken lightly. And I see with my clients that, okay, if I sue my old employer, is that going to hurt me trying to find another job? And I certainly don't think this was casually undertaken. And I can tell you, she was a contractor, not an employee. Under most laws in most states, you're not protected as a contractor, which is something people are shocked by. That you can be harassed, you can be discriminated against, but if you're not an employee, you're not protected. They do allege that the California Civil Rights Act does cover contractors, and there is a second law that I think was recently amended. And I'll give the disclaimer: I'm not barred in California. I'm not barred in New York, which we'll talk about later. But there's a separate provision of the code that I think was amended to sort of cover the movie industry, where people aren't employees. Like Ashley Judd is suing Harvey Weinstein, and she wasn't employed by Harvey Weinstein, but under the provisions of this law, well, if you're in a business relationship, you can bring a harassment claim. And what she has to show that it was objectively and subjectively offensive. That, a reasonable person would be offended, and she was offended. And on that second prong, they can come back and say, well, she wasn't actually bothered by this. It was all in good fun. She wasn't really offended until, things went bad later. And it has to be severe or pervasive, which means, severe, are we talking about something that's really bad? Pervasive, was it happening a lot? One issue that she may have on these counts is statute of limitations, because she cites incidents that go back to 2016, 2017, 2018. And, the statute of limitations currently is 3 years on this stuff under the Fair Housing and Employment Act. You can assert something called a continuing violation, which means, there was no real break in what was happening. It was just constant harassment day after day. And so under that legal theory, they can argue that, okay, we're going to reach back in time and bring some of this older stuff up. But I expect the defense to say, no, some of this stuff is untimely. And a lot of as I recall, a lot of the worst allegations were sort of before 2021.
Yeah. And it seemed like it was a constant pattern throughout the years when they did that Not in This Lifetime and they got this version of Guns N' Roses. But let me ask, as somebody who is really ignorant on why, but with the statute of limitations, and that's going to really come into play with the Axl case.
Sure.
What is the reason behind that? Because whether it's 3-4 years in this case or it's 30 years in Axl's case, there are so many variables that can go into play as to maybe why you didn't do this right away. And so what is the legal reason? Because it's almost like, yeah, it's a deadline, but it's putting pressure on somebody that maybe she's like, you know what, I'm going to deal with this. This guy's, annoying me, but whatever. I'm surrounded by good people. I'm not in any real danger. But maybe with this copyright stuff, she's thinking, and again, of course, this is hypothetical from the outside. She's like, you know what? Screw him. He's screwing me with this copyright. All this other stuff that I never said anything about all these years. Now I'm bringing it to light. Could that be looked at too, saying you're only bringing this up because of this? And so that's the second half of it. So why the statute, and could it be argued that she's only bringing that up now to support her copyright claims?
Yeah, I mean, that could be sort of a credibility argument as to whether she was truly, as we said, subjectively offended by it, whether it really bothered her. Although reading the allegations, it's hard to imagine that that she wouldn't be. I mean, and there's a lot of reasons why people don't bring claims against their employer, especially if they're still working for them at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's a different matter whether you've already left the place or whether you're still there. So, I mean, I think there's perfectly good reasons why she wouldn't have brought that claim previously.
That's how I look at it. I mean, she's traveling the world there's a lot of women on that tour with the management and Beta, and I said, the wives or girlfriends of the band members and Melissa Reese. So yeah, it could. So I guess, how do you view the case now? What is next, and who do you like? What do you see a settlement happening? Do they have to approach this? Okay, we have the copyright decision, then we have the sexual harassment decision, or those, since they were in the same claim, are those two kind of married together that they can't be separated?
Yeah, I mean, they chose to bring them in one action, which I think is appropriate. Even though they are distinct claims, I mean, they're both arising out of the same business relationship from the same period of time. Mm-hmm. So the case has been filed. It gets served, and then they will file a response, which is either an answer, where for each of these numbered paragraphs, and there's I don't know, a couple thousand of them. They say whether they either admit or deny the allegations of that particular paragraph, or they could file a motion to dismiss, which on the sexual harassment claims, I doubt we'll see a motion to dismiss, unless it's on, her contractor status. And then from there, you begin discovery. And, you start requesting documents from the other side. They request documents from you. And then you start taking depositions, where you ask a person questions under oath with a court reporter there. And once you go through all of that, the defense usually will file what's called a motion for summary judgment, which says, Judge, they do not have enough evidence to reach a jury. And in the employment context, it's not unusual for a case to fail at summary judgment, especially in federal court. And if you get past summary judgment, you get through trial, which in a typical employment case, you're talking about maybe a 2-year timeline in federal court. And obviously, you have a lot of complicated issues here with the copyright issues that are intermingled in. So there's a long road ahead for everybody. But at any point along the line, the case could settle. And jury trials are relatively rare. Most cases resolve at some point along the timeline, and it could be tomorrow, or it could be, I had a case settle when we were picking the jury. So, it could certainly settle at any time, and it's just hard to predict, if and when.
What do you typically see when, and I know you can't really answer this because a lot of people were asking for Fernando's resignation and Team Brazil's resignation. I'm not one of those right now. Because again, I need some sort of decision to be made. I don't want to call from someone's livelihood until this is proven to be true. But allegations, though, and in today's 24/7 news cycle, and clickbait headlines and headlines where people just don't even read the article. I mean, there are people who are claiming for Fernando's job. What you've seen in your cases, do you see people of upper management more often than not resign if they don't have a history of it, or are they there to fight and prove their name? What do you is there a ratio that you kind of see? I guess in the typical business, because this is a rock band, it's a different world, but in a business with CEOs and COOs, do you typically see that big company being like, you know what, we don't even want this person, even though it may not be true, having them around is not good because there are still people clamoring for their job. So that's something I think a lot of fans, I know we can't really answer that, but something that, you've seen perhaps, because that's a big thing. He's been a very public manager. So I don't know if this is going to be whatever the court decision could be. They can rule in his favor and Gunther Rose's favor, but is it a good idea to still have him out there? Because there could be fans still upset regardless. Yeah,
I mean, whether people stay employed after allegations are brought, it's very fact specific. There's not a one size fits all, but if an employer has noticed that somebody is a problem, and they continue to employ them, they could potentially be opening themselves up to a future claim for negligent retention. If they do it to someone else, like, okay, well, you knew about this, you kept the guy on, and look what happened now. But obviously we've read the complaint and that's it. So we've only heard one side of the story, and I'm sure he has his version of what happened.
Right. And I am a believer. And that being said, because I know we're two guys here talking, I'm a supporter of the Me Too movement. There are a lot of people, the aforementioned monster Harvey Weinstein needed to be brought down. I believe women more so, but however, that it's not a one size fits all situation. There are people who lie and take advantage of the system, and that kind of lends itself. Is that what's happening? Not with the Katrina case, but with the Axl Rose case. And I did get questions, so maybe this is kind of segue into the Axl Rose case, where he's being sued by a former penthouse pet in 1989, that he abused her, that it was rough sex gone wrong, essentially. People may have read the article. It came out in 2016 where that happened. Nothing ever materialized from it. There was a documentary that came out 2 years ago called Look Away, where the story was told, and she kind of tells a little bit of a different story than what's in the her lawsuit. But this kind of, I guess, goes to a question I asked before. So before we get into all the specifics, this is from Greg Benbra on Facebook. If Jeff could speak to the legal rationale of the Adult Survivors Act and other similar state laws that extended the statute of limitations for these types of claims, it might help give perspective as to why courts allow claims that allege abuse from decades ago to be considered and litigated. The most common thing I hear when it comes to this suit and other such lawsuits, such as the case against Steven Tyler: why did this person wait so long to file a claim? Why should the court system be used for cases where facts arose decades ago? So I think that's a big question, and I don't want to be dismissive of decades old just because it happened. People have trauma. It can happen for whatever reason. I don't really believe her, given the information that I've seen and heard, but I don't want to dismiss any woman that's ever come out with long, look again, Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby. So if you could speak to, I guess, the Adult Survivors Act, and I know you don't have practice in New York, but there was that law that was extended, and that's why you saw things against Jamie Foxx and a lot of other big name celebrities happen like at the 11th hour, so to speak. So if you can give us your expert opinion on
Yeah, so Governor of New York signed in the New York Adult Survivors Act in November of 22, and saying, okay, we're going to open up a 1-year window where we're gonna waive these expired statutes of limitations. And the reason for that is political and social. That as a culture, we sort of had an awakening the last few years about the nature of sexual abuse and how it manifests in victims and why they may not come forward, which can include, they face a lot of adverse consequences. They're probably getting, you can get nasty message on social media, people saying that you have bad motives, that you're lying, and there's a lot of shame involved. It's obviously you're putting a lot of very private, personal, traumatic things out there into the world for other people to not only know about but judge. And we've come a long way as a country as far as how we treat victims, but we know that there's a long history of blaming victims, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of history of victims not seeing justice, and they go through it all for nothing, right? So that's how we kind of got to this legal and cultural moment.
Yeah, and everything you said is true, because while I defend Axl, I'm sure if people really paid attention to like my feed and what I liked and comments I supported, I didn't support anything that called her names. Like I don't know what this woman went through, whether how much of it is true, if it all is true, if none of it's true, something happened, and I don't want to take the position of, oh, she's lying completely. Same thing with the Johnny Depp case. I mean, it's hard to say when you're not there, when you're not a part of it. It's so nuanced. And a recent case that, again, people that you could be a fan of, and I accept that, like Danny Masterson from that 70s show, just so disappointing. I used to look up to that character Hyde, thinking he was so cool, but then it's like I can't watch that show anymore because it's just knowing what he did. So I guess with this Axl Rose thing, you've heard things throughout the years, and a couple points where people will bring up that People magazine cover that came out with the battered beauties. And I'm like, you know what? I know People is a very famous magazine. It's not the National Enquirer. But if you go back to certain sensationalistic headlines, and it's not against men. So I wanted to be like, you know what? I wonder how they covered Britney Spears, who we all defend now. And I'm telling you, and I'm not saying this retroactively, when she shaved her head, I'm like, you know what? She's suffering from something mental. I'm not making fun of. This is not funny. But no, they did. Inside Britney's meltdown. So I mean, it's not a court case that they were. It's still People magazine. So I want people to take that with a grain of salt. A couple other things I want to bring up, because it's never going to come out unless it's through me on social media or on this podcast now. The unfinished, never to be finished book with Doug Goldstein. And I wanted the good, the bad, and the ugly. I just didn't want a fan book. And it could be off air, on air. I will tell you, because it doesn't matter to me now. I haven't spoken to him since, and I'm not going to put it up for sale. Some people think about that. I feel like I'm opening myself up to lawsuits. Speaking of which, even though we never signed anything, we just kind of have like a Zoom handshake of 50-50 when it was done. And that was about it. So let me just say, people are like, well, he has a history of this. He has a history of getting into arguments. He goes, Axl loved Erin and she loved him. So Erin Everly, of course, the daughter, what Sweet Child of Mine was about. So those who are citing It's So Easy could also cite Sweet Child of Mine. That's the duality of Axl Rose, by the way. Even though Duff wrote the lyrics of It's So Easy, that's the duality, though, of Axl. But they just weren't a good match. The media has a lot of details wrong. No battered beauties, as People magazine once stated. I can't speak to her or what Stephanie Seymour has said publicly or in court. What I can speak to, one of the many true things you'll find out about Axl Rose, about how he really treated women. I was with the guy for nearly 2 decades, 17 years, if you want to be specific. Surely I would have seen something. I know I know the signs of abuse firsthand. He was abused by not sexually, but he was hit by his dad. So that kind of abuse. Erin Everly was really, really, really sweet to me. I'll never say a negative thing about how she treated me. But Erin and Axl had one of those relationships. I had one with a gal we called Psycho Cindy. She dated Janie Lane in high school. He didn't tell me that she was a psycho before I got involved. I was like, thanks a lot, Janie. Also, when people call people like psycho, or like how Axl's psycho, how what you said before, have these last few years looking at victims, the same thing with mental health. What we saw once as crazy is now bipolar. It could be treated. So I think we're looking at those words. And I think we need to do some revisionist history in Axl's behavior with the bipolar lens, given how he's behaving today. So Doug goes on to explain that's who basically Erin was. He was a jabber. Don't poke the bear. She used to poke the bear all the time. And so they would get into these really heated conversations. I would always hear on the receiving end. I would always be on the receiving end of Erin's phone calls. Help, he's going to kill me. No, he's not going to kill you. It was rinse and repeat with these kind of arguments. It never escalated to violence. Axl fought dudes, not women. There was one instance where Erin called Doug over. Help, he's going to kill me. Again, Axl was obviously not going to kill her, but I still came down to help out the situation. I show up. All the furniture is thrown around. There's a picture thrown out the window, like paintings and out. And I'm standing outside on the grass where I hear this tiny voice. Dougie, Erin, where are you? I'm over here in the rose bushes. Erin whispered over to me. She's naked, literally sitting in rose bushes. Before anything else, I start going in the house and getting a robe for her. What's going on? He went crazy and he's threatening to kill me. Okay, well, he's not here anymore. You sure? I'm positive. I looked around. His car's gone. He's not here. You're safe. He took it out on the furniture. That relationship was tumultuous, to say the least. It was always something. Always something. Now, I'll just say this, too, with Stephanie Seymour, because I feel like you have to build. People were asking, and I'll credit the person after, can you use these cases against Axl in this particular case. So with Stephanie Seymour, basically Axl kept finding the same girl. Axl had a bit of what I had, finding women that are dysfunctional as dysfunctional as you. No one knew that side of Stephanie. Axl felt that if someone needed him, that somebody needed him. She's fucked up in the head. I'm fucked up in the head. Attracts alike. So when Axl, he also didn't expect to fall in love with his young sons like Dylan. He wanted to be his dad. So like he just wanted to be a good role model for his dad. But they were constantly fighting. And it was similar to Aaron. He would just be like, just stop the fighting, please. But when you poke the bear, you come at me hard, I'm going to come back at you 10 times worse. So the verbal stuff may have been there, but it stems from being an abused kid. I knew the duration of why Axl acted the way that he did. You're so afraid you're going to get struck. You're going to strike back first and fast. That's how it was in Axl's relationships. However, it does not blind me to the truth. I'm always, I'm aware there's two sides to every story, giving everybody the benefit of the doubt. Did I see any bruises ever on Aaron? Blood? Marks? No, no, and no. The only blood I ever saw was self-inflicted when she jumped into the rose bushes. Same thing with Stephanie. Never saw any physical manifestation of what she said that he did. I just didn't. Trust me, again, I know how to look out for this stuff. There was this inconsistency between her and Aaron's words from what I saw they were presenting. I just knew Axl very well for 17 years that he would never start something. It's just not who he is. He just wanted to be loved, wanted to love and be loved. And I'll just say this because this is a story that'll never be out there, and I'll wrap up my portion of this. That once they got into a fight where Stephanie kicked him in the balls, and Axl, he admits this, that may have pushed her down away from me. I don't know about you. Maybe that could. You get kicked in the balls. I will never ever hit a woman ever. Like never have, never will. But that could be a reaction like, I don't know. That's crazy. So he apologized for it though. So much so, he asks Doug to get him a white horse. I'm gonna ride up to Stephanie's house on a white horse and ask for forgiveness. So he got an Arabian horse. Who John Reese was the tour manager of the time, and his wife happened to be in that world. That he needed an Arabian white horse, and he went up to her window and apologized with flowers, and he's just wanted to show that no one knows that side of Axl Rose. They just know this battered beauty side. So actually, let me just say this before, and how many pages was Axl's compared to the cat one? It was not. It was
The complaint against Axl was just 20 pages.
Right. So just 20 pages, but there's a lot of things people can read about it. So with that, I think it's funny, I guess, what's out there that we know. So I watched that Look Away documentary where it starts out talking about lyrics from Iggy Pop, which are weird. You know, you could say that about a lot of songs now, from Winger, from even the Beatles. She's 16, she's 17. It just all seems friggin' weird in today's prism. I mean, when I grew up, I'm a young kid. I don't get that, why that's uncomfortable. But they were hit songs, whatever. So watching the documentary again, it was started out with underage lyrics toward Iggy Pop. Then it went into a story about Steven Tyler that's been out there with an underage girl that he took along and tour with him. And then it ended because the Axl stuff was kind of in the middle with Kim, the famous, infamous manager of the Runaways, you know, and getting a 15-year-old Cherie Curry and getting these underage girls. And then Axl's story had nothing to do with underage girls. So I just thought that seemed very out of place there, very strange. And what also seems strange is that this woman, this former Penthouse pet, so a grown woman who admits wanting to sleep with Axl Rose at this time, which, by the way, does not make it okay. You can agree to sex, but that stuff can elevate and abuse can still be occurred.
Correct.
So that needs to be said too, where the word rape was not used. However, her framing, and Jeff, we spoke about this off air, implies that rape happened. So within that doc, she had said it wasn't rape, it was consensual. but then he starts going off saying that why do I still feel this way and he doesn't. First of all, I don't know how Axl feels. The guy's been in therapy his entire life, so he could be so regretful of half of his behavior. But then said, "Oh, I Googled the stuff about him and what he used to do." So I wanted to take away that what Googling does. Googling can only get you so far, I think. So I just thought that was a really lazy thing to have happened. And I just told you this, Jeff, off the air. I'll bring it up here. So Vicky Hamilton and Chris Webber from Hollywood Rose were both in the documentary, saying nothing different than they've said in every other Guns N' Roses documentary they've ever been in. But this was framing Axl as somebody dangerous and unhinged. And I just found it surprising. So I reached out to Vicky. That's not what she signed up for. She spoke about what she speaks about a lot was the boys club in Hollywood and being a manager at that time. And they took a small portion of her interview to frame it like she was speaking ill of Axl. She would never have done it if that was the case. She had not seen the documentary until I told her about it. She's like, I'm in it. She's like, oh, I remember being interviewed for this. This is not what I signed up for. That's messed up. So that needs to be said. So all of that being said, see, this is like what I know. In addition to my interviews, and this is why I defend Axl Rose, but I don't have a lawyer here. I don't know if she has a case. Now I got a lawyer here. Now, again, there are people. Let me see if I could find the person who said, "Can you bring up these old cases?" I don't know. I'll find it. But if you can just, I guess, speak to all of that. I know I just said. I know I just said a lot this day. Okay, here we go. Red Black 1206 on Twitter. Can old court cases that were settled out of court, Aaron and Stephanie, be used in this case? So I don't know. I guess that's where we'll lead off with. Can those cases be used?
Yeah. So in the criminal context, what we call that is prior bad acts. And I've done some criminal work, and in the rules of evidence are very restrictive about bringing stuff in because it's prejudicial. In other words, if in a criminal case, you don't want the jury to convict someone because they don't like something he did in the past. He's on trial for the thing he's on trial for, and that's it. In the civil context, and it's important to remember this is a lawsuit, it's not a criminal case. And part of that is that Sheila Kennedy only needs to prove her claims by what's called a preponderance of the evidence, which means it's more likely than not that it's what she alleges is true, as opposed to a criminal case where it's beyond a reasonable doubt, right? So we're talking about 51% certainty as opposed to 99% certainty. There is, the rules of evidence in the civil context as far as prior bad acts. They may have more luck getting things in. The fundamental test tends to come down to prejudicial versus probative, which means how relevant is it and how likely is it to inflame the prejudices of the jury if they hear about it. They've sort of hinted that they're going to try and get some prior bad acts in by their petition, because the petition refers to a 1985 arrest, which I didn't know about, where Axl was picked up for alleged statutory rape, and then the charges were dismissed. They refer to the People magazine story involving Aaron. And by the way, in preparing for this, I noticed, I forget where I found it, but somewhere I think Aaron alleged that Axl grabbed her by the hair at one point, which is what's alleged here. So, right. It's obviously a similarity of allegations there. They also make reference to, I think Steven Adler stated that he saw Axl push a woman down a flight of stairs. They refer to that. So the fact that it's in the complaint, leads me to believe that there will be some effort to bring some prior bad acts in. And the question is, well, how do you do that? Who's your witness? You can't just bring in a copy of Steven Adler's book and present it as evidence. So that, they're going to have an issue. Okay, how do they get this stuff admitted? If Axl, if it's in trial and Axl testifies that, no, I've never done X, Y, and Z, on direct examination, it sort of opens up the door on cross to come back and say, oh, what about this? What about this? So, there will be big fights about what comes in and what doesn't if there's a trial. And, that's all settled through, pretrial motions, and you argue in front of the judge, and the judge makes the evidentiary rulings. But during discovery leading up to trial, it's a very, you're allowed to explore, pretty much anything that's arguably relevant. So, they will be requesting documents. They will be asking questions about, anything and everything on what happened in the past. But at the end of the day, what a jury would hear, it's up to the judge and the New York Rules of Evidence, what comes in.
Okay. Do you have the Axl lawsuit in front of you? Because I have a question. This is from Irene GNR. Oddly enough, at Justice for Axl on X on Twitter, I don't get numbers 2 and 19 in the preliminary statement. They seem contradictory to me. If she, quote, wasn't aware of his identity and popularity, end quote, then how did she, quote, use his fame, status, and power as a celebrity to manipulate, control, and assault her?
Yeah, and that does appear to be inconsistent, right? Like if you didn't know he was famous. Well, when she met him, I think she'd been told that he was famous, but prior to her friend telling her who Axl Rose is, claims that she'd never heard of him, which he was obviously very, very famous in 1989. So his power as someone well known. I mean, if you were taking her deposition and you said, Sheila, how do you reconcile these two statements? I mean, she would probably say, well, he had this entourage, and they were doing what he said, and Ricky Rackman was doing what he was told, and he had sway and influence and things like that. It's not immediately clear, what the fact that he was famous, how that really plays into what happened. If these same allegations could have been made against anybody, right? Famous or not famous.
Unless it was to coerce her into the room. Hey, I'm Axl. But in that 2021 documentary, she asked her friend, like, oh, he's hot. Like, yeah. And it was a whole, went up to the room with Ricky Rackman. Axl left with the other girl. And Axl, fashion consistent, like, starts yelling at her. She ran out of the room. And that pulling by the hair, uncomfortable story happened. Then she started getting her legs cut on shag carpeting, which I'm like, how do you cut yourself on shag carpeting? But I don't know. But immediately, and this is something I'm really curious about, because as we look at a lot of things differently now with victims and with mental health here, 2023, and this has been consistent too with anyone I've interviewed about Axl, saying that he could be the sweetest guy, and then all of a sudden just flip. And that seems to me, I'm not a therapist, I'm not, but I've been to therapy. I know enough about this. I have family members that are manic. I mean, I'm clinically depressed. Both of my parents are mentally ill. So it just seems like the behavior of a mentally ill person, because right away he started apologizing. I'm so sorry, and cleaning her up. And then that's when they had consensual sex, which he says in the video, that it was sweet. It was, he was very nice. When he kissed me up against the wall, it wasn't forced. I was into it. How much does mental health play where he wasn't getting the treatment back then that he's getting now? Can you go that route, saying that you are dealing with, oh, you took advantage of a mentally ill person, or this is somebody who can't be held for their actions at this point because they were not diagnosed properly? Is that something that's used now in today's court?
No, I don't really think you get any mileage out of that.
Okay.
Axel issued a statement through his lawyer that says he doesn't remember anything about this, right? Which, that can make it difficult for him to defend in the sense that if he sticks to that, the only thing he'll be able to say is, I don't know, I don't remember, I have no memory of this, which means he won't be able to dispute details. He won't be able to say, well, no, it didn't quite go like this. It went a little different. It went like this.
Okay.
So, I think I would be slightly concerned with that if I were defending Axl. And you sort of got, and I assume people who are listening are familiar with the allegations, but you sort of got, two distinct things going on here. So, they meet at the club. They go back to his hotel room. She goes to the restroom. She sees that, in addition to the cocaine and the alcohol, that he's taken lithium and Adderall and other medications, and this concerns her. She thinks, well, trouble could be brewing. And then they go back to Axl's room. The room's cleared, and it's 4 people in the room. It's Ricky Rackman, it's Sheila Kennedy, this other model named referred to as B I've seen, and Axl. And then, Axl and B begin sexual activity, and then Sheila and Ricky leave, and then they just hear commotion, that Axl's yelling and breaking things. And then the allegation is Axl comes back down out of the room, grabs Sheila and pulls her by the hair on the rug, takes her back in the room. And at that point, it's just Sheila and Axl in the room. And that he has intercourse with her, which she states is non-consensual. And from that, once someone has committed these violent acts, grabbing and hair pulling, she will argue that at that point, well, the stage has been set that this is a violent person and he might hurt me. And so if I say no to sex, well, he might do something else. He might hurt me again. And that it was inherently coercive that way. So just on the grabbing her and pulling her hair, that's bad. That's assault and battery. And if she'd filed a claim at the time, she could have just sued him for that without alleging sexual assault. Just, okay, this, Axl grabbed me, dragged me across the floor. I'm just suing him for assault and battery for that. She can't do that now unless she ties it to sexual assault under this New York law that extends the statute of limitations. Except that there's another claim under New York City law, this Gender Motivated Violence Protection Act, which, she could, setting aside the sexual assault, if she can establish that he was motivated to assault her, drag her and pull her because of the fact that she's a woman, she can bring an action just for that. So even if she fails to prove sexual assault, there's still potentials that she could recover just on gender motivated assault. But for any of the emotional distress, intentional infliction of emotional distress claims, the assault battery claims under, that are extended under the New York Adult Survivors Act, she has to tie that to sexual assault. And that's defined, she has to prove that this would have been a violation of the New York criminal statutes. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense.
I'm learning. It is complicated for those of us who are not who do not take the bar exam. So that's why I really do appreciate your time, and we can keep going on and on, but I want to just at least get this question in from Amy Dolores Blair. So this kind of parlays into that. So with regard to the suit against Axel, I haven't seen the answer, but if it's a general denial, which you said that's Axel is doing, but he's kind of putting himself in a corner where he can't say, oh well, it didn't happen this way, it happened that way. Do you think it should be amended to include an alternative pleading alleging consent? And also with that documentary, where how much weight would that have, the recording have? Because it just seems like a very different story where the sex again was consensual, but she's like, it wasn't what she signed up for initially. She probably just thought she was gonna, I guess, I don't know, whatever normal sex is, but it got a little out of hand with the pulling and the screaming, the apologies. It was just more emotionally taxing than it should have been. That's to put it loosely. So if you're plaintiff, do you want it in or out of documentary? Would you want that to be used? Because she said it was consensual, but can you have an effective consent following an assault? So, yeah, that's kind of what we've been talking about here.
Yeah. So, as far as, I've seen 3 versions of her telling this story: the complaint, the interview in the documentary, and then her autobiography. So she published a book, which I downloaded on Amazon to get ready for this. And so she will be cross-examined for any inconsistencies between 3 versions of this story. And, if I was representing Sheila, we would have to do a lot of thinking about how we're going to prepare for these questions, because they're going to be very, very difficult. Because, she's been pretty explicit that, she stated it was consented, it was okay, it was fine. These are quotes from the documentary. But, even in the documentary, she says it's okay. And then she says, I was embarrassed and humiliated. I felt dirty. I felt shame, which is okay. If it's okay, it doesn't sound like it was okay if you felt embarrassed, humiliated, dirty,
Right.
and shame. And so, she'll be given a chance in her deposition. Okay, can you explain why you said that this was consensual and now you're saying it's not? And I'm sure she will give a very well prepared answer to that they're going to spend a lot of time on how she's going to answer that question. And, there's legal reality and there's ordinary reality, right? And just if you're just talking to people, not in a courtroom, and you can think of a lot of reasons why someone who had a sexual experience they didn't want might say that, oh no, it was fine, it was consensual, because they don't want to deal with additional questions, they don't want to deal with shame, they don't want to deal with all that stuff we talked about earlier. And you might understand why someone would be inconsistent on that. But if you're trying to prove something with evidence in court, those inconsistent statements are going to be they're going to be very difficult to deal with. And she's going to have to do really well on fielding that. And it may be on that part of the claim, it may be too much to overcome. We'll just see if it does indeed go to trial. We'll just have to see how it plays out.
Could you see Ricky Rackman being subpoenaed since he was mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. They're gonna want to talk to this so far unnamed Model B. They're gonna want to talk to Ricky Rackman, and it's unclear how cooperative they're going to be or where their sympathies are going to lie, and they'll be critical for establishing everything that led up to the alleged sexual assault. But for the assault itself, the only people in the room were Sheila and Axl.
Right.
And so, Ricky and B won't be able to testify as to that. But
I guess because we are not giving a guilty verdict, innocent verdict. That was never the point of this. This was just
Sure.
to have again, a rational, intelligent conversation. Me kind of representing the fan. I mean, we're both fans of GNR. That's why we're both here. But representing the fan who just really doesn't understand the legality, like you just said, the legal reality versus just the regular reality. So I needed help with that, which you really have helped with today. But what do you see? Because if he settles, do you see that as an admission of guilt? But if it goes to trial, then that's his name in the paper for longer. And so what would you do, and what do you see happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to predict. Emotions play into whether cases settle or not. It's not like, I mean, this is Axl making the decision on whether to settle. It's not, an insurance company saying, okay, we have, Y on the chart is our risk and X is our expenses and so forth and so on. So it comes down to a lot of, soft people things, right? And he may say, no, I'm not paying a nickel on this. I don't care. We'll do whatever we have to do. Or he may say, for whatever reasons, that no, it's worth it to resolve it. And, and then if it does resolve the terms of the settlement, there's different ways of setting that up. There could be confidentiality, it could binding on Sheila, binding on Axl, who, you're not allowed to talk about this. The agreement could explicitly say, well, this is not an admission of guilt. And all that's negotiated, right? You negotiate the money and then you negotiate the terms of the agreement. So, it's hard to predict, what the case is worth, and which may or may not be disclosed if it's settled. I'm sure, she would want to be able to talk about it. And it just comes down to whatever they're able to work out or not.
I mean, being a Guns N' Roses fan, I mean, we're waiting on new music. We're waiting for lawsuits. Like, what's going on? This has been a tough band to follow, but we do it. We hope both of those situations end well, whatever the result may be. I'm trying to find the quote from my friend Graham over in Ireland, who does all like the graphics of this. He put it perfectly. He summed it up. God, I'm going through all my tweets again, like retweeting death threats, rape apologist, you're white. I mean, Jesus. I mean, I hate that, man. It's like, okay, you don't know about me. Well, okay, I don't get anti-Semitism. I have a dad who killed himself. Like I have a lot of trauma in my life, so I can't speak. And again, Axl, I shouldn't say again, I haven't brought this up, but I was bringing this up online. Axl is a victim of abuse by his father and his stepfather. So it doesn't excuse him from behavior, but it goes to show you why he behaved in a certain way. It's just it's sad. It's sad all the way around. Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Eyewitness documentaries. I was stalling when I think that worked out well. Being a Guns N' Roses fan requires sheer grit and mettle. So I guess the one little statement I wanted to get. Jeff, what do you normally charge for an hour? Can I ask that? You don't have to say if you don't want. Whatever it is, hopefully a plug will do. I appreciate you taking this time out. I mean, I told you at the beginning, your time is valuable. I know how much work, because I have friends that are lawyers, you put into it. And the fact that you did so much homework for this and you came here prepared, I can't thank you enough. This was a very important and special conversation for us to have here in Appetite. So HKM Employment Attorneys, they have businesses, different states. I don't know how many you have, how many practices there are.
Yeah, we're home office is in Seattle. And we've got locations all across the country. I'm based out of St. Louis. We handle St. Louis and Chicago. So, and we represent employees. And so certainly, come find us if you think you might have a case or you need counseling about something.
And again, you get not only talk to an intelligent man, a Guns N' Roses fan. So you should go to his Twitter. I liked it the other day. You sent me your acoustic cover of Night Train. Or no, excuse me, My Michelle.
My Michelle, yeah.
Yeah, which is pretty awesome. So if you Porsche Jeff, so if you want to follow Porsche Jeff on X Twitter, and it sounded good. I had never heard My Michelle acoustically. As you said, should have been maybe the B-side of Lies. It should have been on there.
Yeah, I think that would have been a good candidate for the acoustic side of Lies. Yeah, retweet that and
I will.
we can get that performance out there.
No, I definitely will. Well, Jeff, thank you so much. I encourage, if you have questions about this conversation, whether we do a part 2 or whether you can answer them on X for people, if they have any questions about this conversation today, I'm always open. This isn't just a closed. That's the beauty of actual conversation and not 160 character tweets. We can keep going back and forth. So
absolutely.
Hopefully the next episode will not deal with sexual harassment, and I'll go back to interviewing rock stars.
There you go.
So that does it for this episode of Appetite for Distortion. When will you see the next one? In the words of Axl Rose concerning Chinese democracy, I don't know if soon is the word, but you'll see it.